Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe. My name is Jamie and welcome to the final part of the Z-37 by Eduard in 1/72 scale. I'm going to start off by doing the drop tanks. So they were primed and then had a solid coat of alclad steel because these are going to be really rusted up. So after the steel they had a layer of satin varnish by VMS, then a layer of hairspray, and then a mixed grey from various Tamiya tones, and then this was chipped. Exactly the same method as I used on the airframe in the previous episode. And by doing the grey as an undercoat, it knocks that shine off and you get a really nice weathered metal effect, as you can see. This was sealed in with varnish and the process repeated with a red-brown colour. And again, that was sealed with varnish, had another layer of hairspray, and now I'm going to spray the yellow exactly the same as the airframe. Although this time I had a little bit of a thicker coat because I wanted stronger and bigger chips on this. This is going to be a really battered up, beaten up old fuel tank on this one. And we'll just go and leave that to dry now for about an hour or so. And then this is the chipping effect you'll get with that thicker paint layer. That had a rusty wash over the top, but actually I wasn't that happy with it. It left the yellow sort of too orange. So I decided to go back in over the top and put back some of the yellow paint, some fresher paint, with the brush. The paint I'm using is Ammo Yellow, just straight yellow, straight from the pot. It's ready for airbrush, which means it's actually quite thin and it's a really nice consistency to do brush chipping. So the way I'm doing it is I'm keeping the brush not too wet, but I am cleaning it regularly because the paint can dry on the tip, and then I'm applying the chips with a sort of tapping motion and then slowly building up the effect. I'm using the yellow paint that's already there as a guide and using that as a bit of inspiration, and then just building up the layers in in big chunks really, just to simulate that this is an old battered tank and it is rusting up quite nicely. And that really tones down that orange yellow from the paint. But I'm trying to go slightly inside that if I can in areas, and that'll add just another layer of depth. It's almost like what armour modelers do when they paint a lighter colour of the base colour for chips and then go in with steel over the top. It's analogous to that. So I'm just going to speed up the film here. And going back over, making the effect stronger in some areas. So it's not just one coat, it's a few coats in a few areas. I just want to vary it up. You see it's drying quite quickly, so it's easy to handle. And just finishing off in a few areas just to make that yellow nice and strong. Now I'm going to go in with the sponge method and some of the chipping. And actually I thought that was a bit too much. I had too much paint on the sponge, so I just wiped it away with my finger and started again. So I'm just going in quite lightly. I don't want to obliterate all that yellow that I've just put on there. So I'm just trying to catch the highlights and just do a few sort of spots just to simulate some of that pitting that you can get on weathered steel. And we're nearly finished, but we're just going to finish off with a rusty wash. And this time I'm just going to try and concentrate in the recesses and then just give a general filter. But I don't want it as strong as it did last time. I don't have to go in and do some more brush painting. And that's the finished drop tank. Now for all the spray booms and all that gear underneath. And this I wanted to do, again, a weathered steel look. So after priming, all the parts were given a nice even coat of a dark sort of grey browny colour. So it's mainly dark grey with just a touch of brown in there just to warm it up. You can see how wonderful that detail is on that resin part. And the undercarriage, they were painted in the same tone as well. And you can see the finesse on the detail from the photo etch on there and the resin. And this is some kind of feeding pipe blah from the hopper, which is behind the cockpit. Okay, so here's the undercarriage, and it's had a coat of hairspray, and now I'm going to spray on the yellow camouflage. So the hairspray's not there to do chipping effects. The hairspray's there is to clean up any overspray. Now this can be a really useful technique because this part's really quite fragile, and masking is going to be a little bit dodgy. There is going to be a risk that you could damage the parts. But as you can see, I've removed the cap off the end of the airbrush so I can get in nice and close and I can be really nice and accurate with the colour. And you can see some of the overspray there on the undercarriage leg. But all we do is we take a small brush and some water, and we're going to take the hairspray chipping technique right to its extreme, and we're actually going to remove all the paint that we don't want there. What we could do afterwards, if we need to, is just mix up some acrylic colour and do a few touch-ups if we need to. But actually, I didn't need to on this one. It worked really well. So it's a really useful technique. So a bit awkward in parts, as you can see. But the paint, the overspray, it's really, really thin. So it's really easy to activate that hairspray and to remove that excess paint that we don't want. More chipping. So, bit of packing sponge, and we're just going to load up the paint and get rid of the excess, because I want really small and fine chips now. So on the yellow areas, and actually on the leg itself, but the contrast is actually going to be really low there, but the contrast is going to be really high on the yellow parts. So we're just going to go in and very, very lightly dab the corners and the edges, just so those sharp bits will pick up that paint. So you see there, I'm going in on the leg itself, although you're not really going to see that too much. And here's the other leg, a little bit closer. And you can see how just those sharp edges really sort of pick up that paint, and you get really fine chips. But the key is not to have too much paint on the sponge. Okay, and I did the same on the sort of resin distribution bit thing underneath. I'm sure there is a technical term. And then it's in with a rusty wash. So this is just a rust tone oil paint, heavily thinned. And this is kind of halfway in between a wash and a filter. So I want that filter effect. I also want, though, the paint to collect in some of the recesses. So I want the filter to change the hue of the steel, but also make it look like the water's pooled in some of those areas. And these had exactly the same treatment. So you can see how fragile those things are. And it's not surprising that when I was removing them from the scaffolding, I did actually damage the other part. But luckily, I'm doing a derelict one, so, you know, I guess that kind of fits. But you can see that effect of that dark grey brown undercoat and then the filter over the top just leaves that really nice weathered rusty steel effect without being too orange and over the top. And that's what all the gubbins looks like underneath. So that hose is flexible, and I actually manipulated that with some heated up tweezers, and that will eventually be resting on one of the spray booms. Now, something perhaps I could have done before I stuck on all the dangly bits is remove the canopy masking. So in just some areas there was just a tiny little bit of residue of the paint on the glass, but with the tip of the tweezers, very, very carefully you can rub that away. To be honest, it's probably safer using a cocktail stick. There we go, that's the first part done. And here is said cocktail stick. And if you're using paints such as Tamiya, especially the matte colours, they do scrape away really easily with a soft cocktail stick, and it won't damage the plastic. This is one of my favourite aspects of modelling, is taking off these masks, and you really get a sense of the kind of final result approaching rapidly doing this. You see how fragile everything is with all the dangly bits there. So the undercarriage is on, the drop tanks, the propeller, and some of the small photo etched parts. So there's a small photo etched rear view mirror just on the left hand side, and also the windscreen wiper. Now you might see in some of the photos, the rear window on the left hand side I did totally forget to do. And I'm just pushing back there the photo etched windscreen wiper so it sits on top of the windscreen. And there we go, we are almost at the finishing line now. The last step is some pigments. So using the same pigments that I used in the cockpit, so pop back to episode 2 to go and see that. And I'm going to use the same technique here. So just with a very small dry brush, so I can be nice and precise, I'm just going to work some of that pigment into the wing root areas. This is where the dirt would collect, in the kind of nooks and crannies, and not so much on the main wings on the top of it in the middle, but certainly in the sort of shadow areas. That grime's going to build up there and attract that dirt. And you see there, I'm just adding both tones at the same time, blending them together and blending it into the surface. I'm just adding a little bit at a time. I don't want to go too overboard. And now we're going to come in with a little bit of enamel thinner and a bigger soft brush. And this is going to blend and fix those pigments. You could use pigment fixer, That will give a stronger result, but also I find it can be a little bit glossy. So to avoid the risk of having to spray a matte varnish over the top, I thought, no, I'll just use the enamel thinners, and it worked just as well. I'm not going to be handling the aeroplane in these areas anyway. So just on top of the nose there, just going in. And it's important not to leave any sort of edges, because you don't want any tide marks. And then in with the trusty 10 quid hairdryer. And as it all warms up and the enamel thinners flashes off, you'll see the final result. So you can see there how you get that sort of dusty, dirty look. So a bit more of a close-up this time. You may just be able to make out as well some of the brass wire handles that I've fabricated and painted that in a dark iron colour. They're very small. So in with the sort of the lighter dusty tone first, and then in with the darker earthy tone next over the top. So a little bit with the oil dot weathering. I'm just trying to be a little bit random with a bit of thought, if that makes sense. And then in with the thinner for the blending. Just going to work those pigments in together. Spread them around a little bit. And now it almost turns into a bit of a wash. And then just making sure that I don't leave any sort of edges, because we don't want any risk of any tide marks or anything like that. In with the hairdryer, and now you'll see as it flashes off, you'll see the pigments be revealed. Yeah, especially on the wing root there, look. And if you need to, you can go in and add a little bit more. Again, thinner goes on. Manipulate the pigments around as you want. And then back in with the hairdryer just to dry that all off. And there, as it flashes off, you can see the pigments get revealed. Now obviously it's a kind of slab-sided aeroplane with a flat top of the fuselage, so I did add a little bit of pigment at the top as well. Just wiping the canopy clean. And then back in with the thinner. And then again, this time definitely, especially near the top, near the hatch. Just making sure that the pigment runs into the detail there, so it does act as a bit of a wash. Okay, and we're almost at the end. Just the wheels to do. Again, the same pigments. A little bit more awkward now they're all mounted. These are the brassin wheels, so they are resin, they are a little bit more detailed. And you can see the flats on them there. And they actually do rotate, so that makes it easy to put the flats actually on the ground. so you don't get that kind of floating look. Just got to be careful, there's so many dangly bits. Look, my thumb's perilously close to the pitot tube there. And we'll just dry that off with a hairdryer. And you see the pigments coming to life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the project. It was an absolutely beautiful little kit. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's a really good fun project to go to town on the weathering, or if you want a nice colourful model at the end of it. But doing a derelict one was actually really good fun. And that's just a little base. I just knocked up. That's just one of the grass mats from Ammo. And that's it. So thank you very much for tuning in. I've no idea what project I'm going to do next. It's one of two. But whatever it is, stay tuned. And we'll find out very soon. So thank you very much for watching. And I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.